Welcome to the deep dive. We have an absolutely fascinating exploration lined up for you today.
We really do.
It's one that sits right at this collision point between two completely opposite ways of looking at the world.
Right, the deterministic versus the chaotic.
Exactly. On one side, you have the meticulous, highly structured, data-driven mindset of a software engineer.
Where everything is supposed to make sense.
Yeah. And on the other side, we have the messy, profoundly non-deterministic reality of biology.
It is a profound friction point. When you spend your entire professional life building systems where inputs predictably equal outputs,
Right.
where the environment obeys the exact syntax you write, stepping into a physical ecosystem where the subjects have their own survival instincts is quite the paradigm shift.
Oh, I can imagine.
You are suddenly dealing with variables that actively fight back against your optimization attempts.
Which brings us to our guide through this collision of worlds. We only have a single source today.
Yeah, just one post.
We are looking at a blog post dated March 4th, 2026 from qianmeng.org. The author is someone named Ang, who uses just this brilliant self-descriptor. He calls himself an old software plumber.
I love that. That phrase alone tells you volumes about his whole epistemological approach.
Right, because he's not an architect.
Exactly. He isn't claiming to be some theoretical architect living in the clouds. A plumber deals with flow. They deal with leaks, pressure, pragmatic solutions.
Hacking things up.
He connects pipelines. He finds where the system is broken and patches it. It's a deeply hands-on systems-level mindset, which makes his approach to the physical world so compelling to analyze.
Totally. So the mission for this deep dive is basically twofold. First, we are going to examine a highly specific biological dilemma involving aquarium fish.
Which he is actively trying to engineer his way out of.
Right. But more importantly, for you listening, we want to uncover the larger narrative hidden beneath his technical notes. We want to explore how the act of systematically logging and measuring our personal passions might actually fundamentally alter the way we experience them.
It's a huge question.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because before we even get to the biological firewall he hits, we have to look at the sheer scale of the architecture he's built just to track his life.
The metadata of the blog itself is essentially the first piece of evidence here.
Yeah, it's wild.
You can usually gauge someone's commitment to a hobby by how they organize their notes, right? Ang's approach borders on the creation of an entirely personalized, searchable external brain.
I looked at the archive data on the sidebar of his site, and the numbers are just staggering. I mean, he has been logging entries since 2011.
Wow.
But if you look at just the block of years from like 2022 to 2025, he publishes roughly 730 posts annually.
That's 2 a day.
An average of 2 published observations a day, every single day for years. And I want to emphasize for you listening, we aren't just talking about a casual diary here.
No, definitely not.
We are talking about rigorous categorized documentation.
What's fascinating here is the stark contrast in the subject matter he is cataloging.
The range is crazy.
If you look at his project list, it's this massive intersection of disciplines. He writes extensively about free libre and open source software, what he calls Flalo,
Yeah.
and he has detailed notes on programming languages like Python, Go, Rust, and particularly Elixir, Erlang, and Haskell.
Ben, let's pause on that for a second because the specific languages he focuses on, they feel highly relevant to his personality.
Oh, absolutely.
Like Erlang and Haskell aren't just your standard everyday scripting languages. They represent a very specific philosophy of control, don't they?
They completely do. Haskell, for instance, is a purely functional programming language. In purely functional programming, you are striving to eliminate what are called side effects.
Okay, explain that a bit.
So if you run a function with a specific input, it will always return the exact same output without altering the state of the rest of the system. It's perfectly isolated.
All right.
And Erlang was literally built for the telecom industry to create highly concurrent, massively fault-tolerant systems that simply do not crash.
Because phones have to work.
Right. You isolate processes so perfectly that if one fails, the system just keeps running.
Yeah.
It's the pursuit of absolute predictable control.
But then right alongside these notes on building perfectly isolated, side effect-free digital environments, Ang has this explosion of organic, entirely unpredictable hobbies.
The total opposite.
He has notes on gardening, dealing with the chaotic growth of bougainvilleas. He has notes on dieting, notes on meditation. And of course, the primary focus of our deep dive today, notes on fish keeping alongside detailed spawn logs for betas and other fish.
You really couldn't design a more jarring transition.
Not at all.
Think about it, a fish tank is nothing but side effects.
Oh, absolutely.
You feed the fish, which creates biological waste, which causes an ammonia spike, which alters the pH, which changes the toxicity of the water, which stresses the fish, which lowers their immune
Okay,
system.
it never ends.
It is a cascading chain of non-deterministic events. You cannot isolate the variables in an aquarium the way you can in an Erlang virtual machine.
No, you just can't.
And yet, Ang is trying to build a bridge between these two worlds using the only tool he trusts, which is rigorous numbered documentation.
Which brings us to the specific post we are analyzing today, Notes on Fishkeeping Part 203.
Part 203.
Just think about what it means to reach Part 203 of a documented process. He isn't some novice guessing at water parameters.
No.
He is querying a massive database of his own historical successes and failures.
When you have 203 distinct empirical observations to draw from your questions, stop being about basic survival.
Right. It's not just how do I keep these alive anymore.
Exactly. It stops being about survival and starts becoming about systems optimization. How do I make this ecosystem run more efficiently?
That sets the scene perfectly for the conundrum in his March 4th post. So Ang is managing several cichlid spawns simultaneously. Specifically, he's working with zebra cichlids and polar parrots.
Right.
He's managing these massive batches of fry, trying to keep the water parameters stable for hundreds of tiny growing fish across multiple tanks. And he logs a major discrepancy in the growth rates.
He observes that one specific batch of zebra cichlid fry is vastly outpacing the others.
Yeah, they're huge compared to the rest.
This particular group has reached about 1 centimeter in length, whereas the fry in his other spawns are hovering right around half a centimeter.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Ang looks at these multiple tanks, these multiple spawns, taking up electricity filtration capacity and physical space. And the engineer in him sees a redundancy.
Naturally.
He starts wondering if he
Yeah.
can simply transfer the fry from one spawn into another spawn of the exact same species.
It is a classic server consolidation strategy applied to biology.
That's a great way to put it.
If you have 2 servers running at 30% capacity, you merge the workloads onto a single machine to free up hardware. Ang wants to merge the spawns to free up his tanks.
Right.
In biological terms, this practice is known as cross-fostering. You introduce offspring to a different set of parents of the same species, with the expectation that the new parents will simply absorb them into the existing brood.
That sounds reasonable on paper, right?
No!
Especially since they were the exact same species.
It does.
But Ang immediately identifies a massive biological firewall that stops this optimization dead in its tracks. He notes that cichlids possess incredibly intense parental instincts when they enter parenting mode.
We need to look closely at how those instincts operate because it's fascinating. To you or me, looking through the glass of an aquarium, a half-centimeter fish and a 1-centimeter fish both just look like tiny specks darting around.
Barely noticeable.
The visual difference to us is negligible, but to a cichlid parent, that size discrepancy is a blaring alarm bell.
But why is the reaction so extreme? I mean, if the ultimate goal of a species is survival, shouldn't they theoretically welcome more members into the school? Safety in numbers.
You would think so.
Why does Ang fear they will literally attack a slightly larger fry of their own species?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, biological firewalls rely heavily on visual pattern recognition and anomaly detection. Cichlids invest an enormous amount of metabolic energy into protecting a specific brood. They create a highly guarded defensive perimeter. The parents know the visual baseline of their offspring.
So they know exactly what they're looking for.
Right. In this case, a cloud of half-centimeter fry. Anything that deviates from that baseline is statistically likely to be a parasite, a predator, or a competitor trying to siphon resources from their actual genetic offspring.
So the introduction of a 1-centimeter fry isn't seen as an adoption opportunity.
Not at all.
It triggers the system's anomaly detection.
Yeah.
The parent perceives a threat that is literally double the size of its own babies, and the instinct to eliminate that threat completely overrides any passive acceptance. The system rejects the foreign payload.
Precisely. Ang notes that the parents might view the introduced fry as prey, or simply as something else entirely that needs to be neutralized immediately.
Wow.
In software, if you drag a file into a new folder, the folder doesn't aggressively dismantle the file, but biological variables defend their state.
Defend their state. That is so perfectly said. But faced with this natural defense mechanism, Ang puts his hacker hat back on.
He doesn't give up right away.
No, he doesn't just abandon the idea. He devises a mitigation strategy. He theorizes that to bypass the parent's anomaly detection, you have to overload their processing power.
Yeah.
He suggests introducing the new fry during a feeding session.
It is essentially a resource exhaustion attack on the fish's attention span.
That is the absolute perfect way to describe it. You flood the system's inputs with high-value targets, the food.
Right.
While the parents are entirely focused on eating their threat detection, algorithms are temporarily suspended or at least highly distracted.
The CPU is maxed out.
Exactly.
Right.
While the CPU is pegged at 100% dealing with the feeding frenzy, you quietly inject the new code.
A larger fry.
A larger fry into the tank. The hope is that when the feeding stops and the system reboots, the parents rescan the environment, see the new fish mingling with the others, and simply accept it as part of the established state.
It is a highly logical, elegant workaround. It acknowledges the biological reality while using the organism's own instincts against it.
Yeah.
But this is the pivot point of the entire post.
Right.
Because the thing that ultimately forces Aang to abandon the cross-fostering experiment has absolutely nothing to do with the parent's aggression.
Right.
Or the mechanics of the feeding hack.
No, it's his own epistemological limit as an engineer.
Yeah.
He realizes he has a telemetry problem.
Yes.
Aang writes, quote, "And even if we do try this, how can we actually track whether the introduced fry survive in the long run?" Unquote.
This is where the old software plumber hits a wall he just cannot code his way around.
Ah.
Let's assume the feeding hack works flawlessly.
Right.
The 1 centimeter fry is integrated, the parents don't attack it, and the tank settles down. What happens a week later?
Or a month later.
Exactly. What happens a month later when all the fry have grown and the size difference completely disappears? How do you mathematically definitively prove that the specific cross-fostered fish survived?
You can't. You can't put an RFID tag on a fish that small. You can't attach a barcode or assign it an IP address. It becomes completely indistinguishable from the rest of the environment.
And for a software engineer, an action that yields no verifiable data is essentially useless.
Right.
If you cannot track the variables over time, you cannot determine the success or failure of the experiment. You lose the ability to iterate. Without telemetry, it ceases to be engineering and becomes mere guessing.
But I have to push back on that a little bit.
Yeah.
If he's a true hacker, someone who likes to tinker and break things just to see how they work, isn't abandoning the idea a bit of a cop-out?
How do you mean?
Like, shouldn't he just drop the fish and watch what happens and accept that he might not have perfect data? Why paralyze the action just because you can't measure the final outcome?
Because of the difference between a hacker who just wants to break things and a software plumber.
Okay.
A plumber's entire job is knowing where the flow goes. If you connect 2 pipes and seal them behind a wall without installing a pressure gauge, you haven't solved the problem. You've just hidden potential chaos.
That makes sense.
Aang's entire framework, the 730 posts a year, the rigorous logging, is built on the premise that knowledge is accumulated through measurable results. If the environment obscures the result, the action holds no value for his system.
So what does this all mean? How does he reconcile this?
He reconciles it by stepping back and weighing the variables objectively. He looks at the biological risk of the parents acting as predators. He considers the logistical complexity of timing the feeding session hack.
Right.
And finally, he acknowledges the fatal flaw, the absolute lack of long-term tracking data. His final verdict on cross-fostering is remarkably measured. He concludes it is, quote, something worth contemplating but not necessary to proceed ahead.
He doesn't let curiosity override his methodology. He documents the hypothesis, he maps out the potential pitfalls, and he formally logs the reason for aborting the operation.
The rigor holds even when the experiment doesn't.
And that makes Notes on Fishkeeping Part 203 an incredibly valuable piece of documentation for anyone trying to navigate the messy realities of cichlid breeding.
It perfectly illustrates the tension between trying to impose order on a system that naturally resists it. Aang learned something valuable not by doing the thing, but by analyzing why the thing couldn't be accurately measured.
Let's summarize the key takeaways we've pulled from this source for you listening today. We explored the concept of cross-fostering and how biological ecosystems act as their own firewalls.
Yeah.
We looked at the intense anomaly detection systems of zebra cichlid parents, where a mere half-centimeter difference in size turns a potential adoptee into a recognized threat.
We also examined the fascinating friction that occurs when you apply a functional programming mindset, a philosophy built on eliminating side effects and maintaining strict control, to the deeply chaotic, non-deterministic world of an aquarium.
Which is all side effects.
All side effects. The ultimate lesson here is about the epistemological limits of engineering. Sometimes the inability to measure an outcome is the very data point that tells you not to proceed.
Which brings us back to the sheer volume of his archives.
This raises an important question regarding how you approach your own passions and learning journeys. Whether you are studying an entirely new field, struggling with a garden, or trying to master a complex skill,
Yeah,
how much of your progress is lost simply because you aren't logging the variables?
most of it probably.
Aang has an external searchable database of 203 distinct observations on a single hobby. If you treated your own trial and error processes with even a fraction of that structural rigor, how much faster would you identify the patterns holding you back?
The power of having that historical telemetry on your own life is completely undeniable.
It really is.
But as we wrap up, I want to leave you with a provocative thought to mull over on your own. If we fully adopt this software plumber mindset, if we meticulously log track and attempt to optimize every single variable of our personal hobbies, do we risk fundamentally altering the experience?
That is the trade-off.
There is a certain magic to the unpredictable chaos of nature or art, or just tinkering in a garage. If we treat a fish tank or a garden purely as a system to be debugged, does the act of constant rigorous observation ultimately strip away the joy of just letting the system run wild?
Finding the equilibrium between the desire to measure our lives and the need to simply experience them might be the hardest optimization problem of all.
A huge thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the meticulously logged, fascinating world of Qianmeng Ang and the biological firewalls of zebra cichlids.
It was a great one.
We hope it provided you with a new lens through which to view the systems, the chaos, and the telemetry of your own pursuits. Keep questioning the variables, keep exploring the data, and we will catch you on the next deep dive. Take care.